This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. Thank you everyone for coming to the grand finale of our series on the mitzvah of Techeles. And a brief introduction is that what we're presenting in the Shiur is not just haphazard. A lot of research has been done, a lot of investigation, a lot of discussion with Poskim, a lot of analyzing many sources. So I hope that our conclusion is, I hope we're Zoicha la'asuke shmaitza aliba de hilchasa. Be'ezras Hashem, we hope to present the correct conclusion, halacha l'maisa, in accordance with the Poskim. Now, the first thing you need to know, which is very important, is a basic idea about the chilazon. Even before we try to analyze what is the correct chilazon, and do we actually have chilazon today, we have to have a very important idea about this chilazon. The Gemara says in Masechta Sanhedrin on Daf Tzadik Aleph Amud Aleph, Amar le'ahu minol Rav Ami. A certain apikora says to Rav Ami, Amritu, you maintain the shechvi chayi, that one day the dead will come back to life. After all, every believing Jew believes in Tchias HaMesim. You believe the dead will come back to life. So as this apikoros v'ahava afra, but they're dust. A dead body turns into dust. V'afra mikachayi. Could dust turn into life? How could dust turn into life? So Rav Ami says back to this apikoros, let me give you a little mashal. There was once a king who tells his builders, build me a palace in a place where you have no water and no dust, no raw materials. Sure enough, these builders build the king a beautiful palace in a location where there are no raw materials. Soon after they build the palace collapses, the palace falls down. The king says, okay, now build the palace in a place that there are raw materials, where there is dust and water. And the workers say, can't do it. So the king says, what do you mean you can't do it? Kal v'chomer, if you were able to build the palace in a place where there are raw materials, where there is dust and water, certainly you should be able to build the palace in a place where there are raw materials. In other words, if you could build the palace in a place where there's nothing, certainly you should be able to build a palace in a place where there are raw materials. So says the Rav Ami to the apikoros, wait a second. How did God create man in the first place? He made man out of nothing. So if God made man out of almost nothing, certainly once man has already been made and has turned into dust, certainly God could reconstitute man. If God could make man in the first place, certainly He could put him back together again. That's the first argument of Rav Ami. And then Rav Ami says to the apikoros, and if you don't think God could create flesh out of dust, says Rav Ami, go to the valley, and in the valley there is a weasel or a rat or a mouse that today is half flesh, half earth, and tomorrow the half that is earth will metamorphosize into flesh. So you see, earth could change into flesh. God could take the dust of man and make it into flesh. That's another proof to Tchias HaMesim. And finally, says Rav Ami, and the third and final proof is that if you think it will take a long time to have Tchias HaMesim, all you need to do is go up to the mountain. And on the top of the mountain, you'll see one measly chilazon. And it will rain, and tomorrow the whole mountain will be full of hundreds of chilzonos. Very interesting. So Rav Ami is saying, what's the proof to Tchias HaMesim? The greatest proof to Tchias HaMesim is go to the top of a mountain, you'll see a chilazon there, it will rain, and the next day there'll be hundreds of chilzonos. Comes the Yad Ramah, and the Yad Ramah wants to know, what in the world is this chilazon? A chilazon? Which chilazon is this? The Yad Ramah, one of the classic Rishonim on Masechta Sanhedrin, he brings down this Gemara, and he says, some maintain, some Rishonim say, that this chilazon that our Gemara in Sanhedrin is talking about is the chilazon of the Gemara Menachos from which you produce the Techeles. The well-known chilazon. It looks like a fish, and its body is color. It's colored like the sea, and all the qualities mentioned in the Gemara Menachos and Mem Daled. This is the chilazon that we're talking about. But says the Yad Ramah, how could this be the chilazon? How would a chilazon get to the top of a mountain? How would a chilazon get to the top of a mountain? That's the first question. And number two, you're going to bring a proof to Tchias HaMeisim from the chilazon. The chilazon is such an infrequent occurrence. It only comes up once every 70 years. Says the Yad Ramah, a Yesoid Gadol, a tremendous principle. And that is, not all chilazonos are created equal. Not every time it says the word chilazon in Chazal, is it talking about the chilazon from which you make Techeles. There is more than one chilazon. That's an important idea to know. There is more than one chilazon. The chilazon from which you make Techeles is described in the Gemara Menachos with 4 qualities. It looks like the sea, it looks like a fish, it comes up once every 70 years, and it's expensive. But not every time in Shas it says chilazon is it talking about the chilazon from which you make Techeles. So that's important to know. Because if you're going to identify the chilazon, you have to know which chilazon are we identifying. Are we identifying the chilazon of Techeles, or is it a different chilazon? Okay. In this generation and the past generation, many naturalists, many scientists have maintained, and not just scientists, there are many very chashuv Talmidei Chachamim that maintain that the Murex trunculus snail is a chilazon. We gave out a beautiful picture last week. If you want an idea, remember what it looks like. This is the Murex trunculus, and if anybody wants to get a hold of any of the source sheets of any of the shiurim, please email Rabbi Glatstein source sheets at Gmail. We'll be happy to send you all the source sheets of any of the shiurim that you like. So many Talmidei Chachamim, many scientists maintain that this in fact is the chilazon of the Gemara, and therefore if it is the chilazon, or if even maybe it's the chilazon, every observant Jew, every Jew would have the obligation to purchase it as much as it's going to cost. It would be a mitzvah d'oraisa. And the question is, I must admit, I do not wear Techeles. Most observant Jews today do not wear Techeles. Why not? Is it a matter of being lax in the performance of the mitzvah? Is there a case to be made that the Murex trunculus is indeed the Techeles? There is an institute in Eretz Yisrael that stands, its entire function, its entire purpose is to disseminate the Murex trunculus Techeles. Do they have basis? Is there validity to their claim? Or perhaps there is some type of tradition that we do not have Techeles. What is the correct approach? As an observant Jew, we want to approach this topic like any halachik topic. We want to see, does it fit into the Paiskim? Does it fit into the Gemaras? Does it fit into the Rishonim? And from there we will proceed. So let's analyze this sugya like we would any halachik topic. Let's start with the Rambam. And I think if we take an honest look at this sugya, we will see that this is not necessarily a position that stands on solid ground. First of all, the Rambam describes to us what is the chilazon. If you look in the Rambam, in Hilchos Tzitzis, Perek Beis, Halacha Beis, number 3 on your sheets, the Rambam says that how do you color the Techeles of the Tzitzis? You take wool and you soak it in sid, and then you wash it until it's clean, and you boil it in detergent, like all dyers do. V'achar kach meviim dam chilazon. Then you bring the blood of the chilazon. Says the Rambam, what's a chilazon? Tehu dog. A chilazon is a dog. Anybody want to take a guess what the word dog means?
Fish.
Dog is a fish. Yeah? A dog is a fish. Moreover, Rabbi, I ask your humble opinion. Is this a fish?
No.
This is not a fish.
It's a mollusk.
It's a mollusk. It's a snail. This is not a fish. You could ask any 3-year-old, they will tell you this is not a fish. The Rambam is saying that the Murex trunculus is not the chilazon. Let's look at Tosfos. So most of the time, Sfardim paskin like the Rambam. The Rambam's saying it's a fish. Let's look at Tosfos. We know Ashkenazim, almost always passing like Rabbeinu Tam and Tosfos. We hold, the Rosh writes in a tshuva, that the Ashkenazim maintain that Rabbeinu Tam and the Ri were gadol b'chachmo v'minyan more than all the Rishonim. What does Tosfos say about the Chilazon? V'yein loymar, look at number 4, Tosfos in Masechta Shabbos Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. V'yein loymar, didafka Chilazon shehu dog. Tosfos says the Chilazon is a fish. Marav Rabbi, I ask your humble opinion. Is this a fish? This is not a fish. So Tosfos is saying, this is not the Chilazon. So you have the Rambam who says it's a fish. You have Tosfos who says it's a fish. Does anybody say it's a snail? I don't think so. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi says in Masechta Menachos, on the Gemara that says the Chilazon comes up once every 70 years. Rashi says, "Ve'oile min haaretz." It comes out of the earth. Now, Rashi is clearly saying it's not a fish. No fish come out of the earth. So maybe Rashi holds it's a snail. Well, Rashi in Masechta Sanhedrin says, what's a chilazon? Toilaz, a worm. Is a worm a fish? No. Is a worm a snail, though? Not really, but if you want to stick snail into the chilazon, it would sooner fit into Rashi than the Rambam or Tosfos. See, what do you want to say? The Rambam holds it's not the chilazon. Tosfos holds it's not the chilazon. We're going to stick it into Rashi. You know, we almost never paskin like Rashi over Tosfos or the Rambam. Rashi wasn't writing halacha l'maisa. Rashi was writing pshat in the Gemara, the simple interpretation. But okay, maybe you'll say it's Rashi, but not to maintain a chilazon is not like Tosfos and not like the Rambam. So you'll say, well, maybe the word dog is a generic term for all creatures that live in the water. And in fact, the Vilna Gaon in his commentary Masechta Kelim on Parak Yud Aleph, Parak Yud, probably remember well from when the Malach taught you. The Malach taught you before you were born. The Vilna Gaon says, "Kol shebiyam min daghu." Anything in the sea is a fish. So maybe I'll say really the Murex trunculus is a chilazon. The Rambam says fish. Don't you know? The word fish means anything that's in the water. Tosfos says fish. Fish means anything that's in the water. Now, first of all, the Rambam, everywhere else he writes fish, he means fish with fins and scales, right? Hilchos dogim, not talking about the laws of snails. So, but you'll say, but maybe here we'll have the only exception where the Rambam calls a snail a fish. It's a doichek. So it's a question. We're not going to refute the Murex trunculus based on these words of the Rambam, but it's certainly not glat. It's not smooth. It's a question on this approach. It is certainly it's an arrow in the approach of those who maintain that the Murex trunculus is the chilazon. I heard a shiur from Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, who's one of the Rosh Yeshiva in Tarvadas and a Rav in Flatbush, and he wrote down 8 questions that he had from Shas on the Murex trunculus, and many questions he had on the Rambam. And I called him up, and he was kind enough I asked him if I could have his personal notes. I wanted to see for myself what his questions were. So he said they recently printed them, and he was kind enough to email them to me. And I asked him permission to put on the sheets some of the questions that he had. These are questions that I feel are very, very strong and very difficult to answer. So the first question he puts is a question we just asked. The Rambam says it's a dog, and Tosfos says it's a dog, and the Murex is not a dog. So by the way, so says Rabbi Reisman, but they'll answer based on the Gra Masechta Kelim that everything in the water is called a fish. And besides, if you look in the first Sefer on Techeles, Ulois Techeles, they bring another proof. Because William Cole writes that in Latin, fish means all aquatic creatures. Says Rabbi Reisman, who could care less about what William Cole has to say about the word fish in Latin? What does that got to do with the Rambam? Why would anybody even invoke William Cole's explanation for the Latin phrase fish? We're not learning Latin here, we're learning the Rambam. And everywhere else in the Rambam, the word dog means fish, fins, scales, gefilte fish, herring. Nobody, when you go to the store and say you want fish, and they bring you a snail, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Doesn't pass. That's question number one. Is it a tiyufta? It's not a tiyufta. It's a kasha. Let's talk about another thing. The Rambam continues to describe what the chilazon is. Look in number 3, the bottom line. What does the blood of the chilazon look like? V'damai shachar kidiyai. The blood is black like ink. Anybody ever see the blood of the Murex trunculus? No, you know why? Because it doesn't have blood. It's a snail. It has liquid, it has mucus. Do you know what color the mucus is?
Transparent.
It's clear. So Isaac knows, right? It's clear. Sometimes it's even a little yellowish. But the Rambam says it's black. So what are you going to do? The Rambam says the blood of the chilazon is black. So let's open up the Murex trunculus. It has clear blood. So you know what the answer? That if you leave it out long enough, eventually it will turn black. That's what the Rambam means. The Rambam is trying to identify. He's trying to tell us how to know when you got the chilazon. Everything turns black eventually. Would anyone say human blood is black? Let's say you would see in a book, the blood of a human being is black. The person doesn't know human blood. Human blood is red. Yeah, but if you leave it out long enough, of course. So does supper. It turns black after you leave it out long enough. So the Rambam says it's black. So you know what they answer? The Rambam was wrong. The answer, Lulais Techeles, says the Rambam was wrong. You know why? Because the Rambam, they write, didn't have a tradition about the chilazon. The Rambam must have gotten his opinion about chilazon, they write, from Aristotle. So listen to what they're saying. They're saying the Murex trunculus is the presupposition. That's right. That's chilazon. The Rambam? Oh, it doesn't fit in with our discovery. So the Rambam is wrong. Oh, wait a second. That's not the halachik approach. The halachik approach is the Rambam is right. The Rambam, if he doesn't tell us he got it from a secular source, like he does tell us, by Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, he says, this we don't have tradition about, I got it from the Greek scholars. He doesn't write that about the chilazon. He writes his opinion of what? So if the Rambam tells his opinion, and it doesn't fit into our discovery, mi nidcha mipnei mi, who is pushed off from before who? Is the Rambam pushed off from the Murex trunculus, or is this snail pushed off from the words of the Rambam? That's the decision we have to make. Is it a tiyufta? I don't know. Maybe the Rambam means eventually the blood turns black. But it's a question. And you can't make halachas out of sticking things into the Rambam when it doesn't fit in good. A third question. One of the reasons why Rav Herzog dismissed the Murex trunculus, does anybody remember why he dismissed it? Because the color wasn't blue, it was purple. Until recently they discovered that if you make the dye in direct sunlight, not on a cloudy day, it turns blue. So Rabbi Reisman asks, this is Shtar Kasha. The Rambam is giving us, delineating to us, how do you make Techeles? He says you put in this ingredient, and you boil it, and you use this detergent, and you use this chemical, and it's a fish, and its blood is black, and it's found in this sea. Rambam, you left out the most important part, that it only turns blue if you make it in direct sunlight. So you say, where else are you doing it? What do you mean, where else? Who makes dye in direct sunlight? It's boiling hot outside. You ever see a dye manufacturer make dye outdoors? Everyone makes it inside in a factory, in a manufacturer. The Rambam took it for granted. The Rambam assumed we would know you have to make it in direct sunlight. Why would the Rambam omit the most important detail? So you know what their answer is? You don't need direct sunlight. You can also steam it. You see anything about steaming it in the Rambam? The Rambam's telling you how to do it. And according to them, there is a specific methodology that is missing. Either direct sunlight or a steam heat. Is it a refutation? You decide. But these are three very strong questions from the Rambam. Number one, it's not a fish. Number two, its blood is not black. Number three, why doesn't the Rambam say that it needs direct sunlight? Okay. What? Yeah, we discussed that in a previous year. The Radzina Rebbe had an interpretation of what Yam HaMelech means, that it means a salt, it means an ocean as opposed to a lake. By the way, I found later Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky on that line of the Rambam also says, Parshas Bereishis, in I think this week's Parsha, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky writes that you see from the Rambam that Yam HaMelech could mean an ocean as opposed to a freshwater body of water. Okay, here's another question. The Gemara says, if you catch the chilazon on Shabbos, you're chayiv for violating Shabbos. We know there's a malacha on Shabbos called sud, trapping. If you trap an animal on Shabbos, it's a malacha dares. You have a mosquito flying around in your house, and you're a fly, and you wait for it to stop, and you get it. It's an isur doiraisa. You can't catch an animal or an insect on Shabbos. What about if you have a deer that's sleeping? It's a farshlufana deer, and you catch it. Says the Shulchan Aruch, you're chayiv. You know why? Because deer, when they sense you're approaching, will run away right away. They'll wake up and they'll run away. But what about a deer that's sick or old? If you catch an immobile deer, you're not chayiv on Shabbos. You know why? Because the Mishnah Berurah explains it's already trapped. It ain't going anywhere, right? It can't move. You could get it in one fell swoop. Any animal that doesn't require exertion, all you need to do is just take it. There's no malacha of trapping. Ask Rabbi Reisman, and this is a question that they themselves acknowledge, and that is a snail. What does a snail do when you're about to catch it? Whatever it does the rest of the day. It doesn't care. It doesn't even know. The intelligence of a snail is not that great. It doesn't know if it's about to be caught. It doesn't know if it's Sunday. It doesn't know if it's Wednesday night. It doesn't know whether it's coming or going. What does a snail do? Nothing. So how do you trap a snail? You just take it. You could send two little kids down to the seabed, and they'll take the Murex trunculus. Would you be chayiv if you catch a Murex trunculus? No, because it's not trapping. It's there for the taking. And yet the Gemara says if you catch the chilazon on Shabbos, you're chayiv. So how can the chilazon be this snail? You would not be chayiv on Shabbos. So they have an answer to this. Their answer is, trapping it, even though it won't move and run away from you, but it requires a special skill and a special bait and a special tool. That's not necessarily true. Anybody could go down to the seabed and catch it. It's a big question on their opinion. So far we have 4 questions. You know what a major question is? Rav Herzog asked a major question on the Murex trunculus in his seminal work, The Royal Purple and the Biblical Blue. And that is, this Murex trunculus, was it recently discovered? Absolutely not. It existed for thousands of years. Do we have evidence that it was used for thousands of years? Absolutely. In fact, the Murex trunculus was the main source of the color purple. In fact, it suggested that why does the Gemara Menachos tell us how to make Techeles and not tell us how to make argamon? The Gemara doesn't have to tell us how to make argamon. Everyone knows how to make argamon. Murex trunculus. That's why there's no Gemara that tells us how to make argamon. There was even a name for the Murex trunculus. Pliny, who was one of the ancient naturalists, he writes clearly about the Murex dyeing process. And it was called porphyra or purpura. And all the Rishonim mention it. And that's probably why the Gemara nowhere in Shas says how to make argamon. So asks Rav Herzog, and this is explained in an article by Mendel E. Singer in the Journal of Halacha and Contemporary Society, if everybody knew about Murex, and it even had a name, then why would the Gemara Menachos say, let me explain to you what a chilazon is. Chilazon, it's looks like the sea, and it looks like a fish, and it comes up every... Imagine if the Gemara says, let me explain to you what a lion is. What's a lion? A lion is, it has the body of a tiger, and the head of a... We don't need any... The Gemara nowhere explains what an ari is. Everyone knows a lion is a lion is a lion. The Gemara doesn't explain what a tarnagol is. The Gemara doesn't explain what any of the animals are, because people know what animals are. The Gemara doesn't say, you know what a cow is? A cow is this big thing. It says moo. It has a tail, and when there are flies on the body, it whacks the Gemara doesn't tell us what a cow is. We know what a par, an ayel, a soyer. Why all of a sudden, when it comes to dying Techeles, does the Gemara give us the most cryptic explanations? If it was the Murex trunculus, which was the most well-known used snail for dying. In fact, in Rome, it was rampant. Did you know, in some regions, half the population was employed by dying with Murex trunculus? It was the most well-known snail. Why would the Gemara give us cryptic explanation? Just say, purpura. Say the name, instead of giving us explanations that we don't know what it means. You know what the answer is? Because that's not the chilazon. If it were, the Gemara would say it straight out. Why would the Gemara lose the opportunity to define it accurately, hit the nail on the head, say clearly what it is, instead speak in this cryptic way? You know why? Says Rav Herzog, because it's not it. It's not the Murex trunculus. But is there any archaeological evidence that it is? Well, if you look in the Gemara on Shabbos Chavav Amud Aleph, the Gemara talks about how Nebuzaradan, the chief executioner, left some Jews in Eretz Yisrael to be karmim or yoigvim. What are karmim? People who gather balsam. What are yoigvim? People who trap chilazon. Where are those trappers located? From the cliffs of Tzur, from Tyre in the northwest, to Haifa. So in other words, the Gemara is identifying that where are chilazon located? The northwestern seacoast of Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, hundreds and thousands of shells of Murex trunculus have been found in caves, in pits, indicating that they were indeed used in that location. So you'll say, how could you deny reality? There are thousands of shells found in these locations. Obviously they were using it for Techeles, right? Wrong. Why obviously they're using it for Techeles? What color is your shirt? Anyone wearing a blue shirt? I see a lot of blue shirts. I see a lot of purple shirts. They needed to dye it. They needed to color it. What do you think they used? They made it from Murex trunculus. Who says they used it for blue? Maybe they used it for purple. In fact, you have an article over here, also by Mendel E. Singer, PhD. And I'm only bringing this to show you that don't think it's the scientists against the Rabbanim. No, even in the world of academia, it is certainly not unanimous that this is the Techeles. In fact, Mendel E. Singer says it is not possible that it's the Techeles. So it's not even unanimous in the world of scientific scholarship. He writes, look at number 16, there can be little doubt that Murex trunculus was used in ancient dyeing. It has long been accepted that Murex trunculus was used for dyeing purple in ancient times. It was used for purple. There is significant archaeological evidence to support this. However, all the evidence suggests it was used for purple dyeing. There is absolutely no evidence to suggest that Murex trunculus was used to dye blue. Next paragraph. Let's examine the archaeological evidence. Mounds of Murex trunculus shells have been found at ancient dye sites in many locations. These shells were cracked in the exact spot to get the dye. This is solid proof that Murex trunculus was used in ancient dyeing, but does not imply it was used for dyeing blue. Of course it was used. It was used for purple. A 13th century BCE potsherd from Sarepta has a stripe of dye that is believed from the Murex trunculus. Guess what color it was? Purple. Of that, from a dig at Tel Shikmona has a purple Murex dye on it, not blue like it says in the brochure of their institute. So it's a fallacy that there's evidence that they use these shells for blue. It's just not true. It's Of course they use them, but they didn't use it for blue. Let me read to you what Rabbi Reisman says about the archaeological evidence. He says, number 17, Mashadarshu barabim, that which they disseminate and they publicize, that they found in pits and caves, thousands of murex. He says, La halacha in zamala umarid mashahu. It has no bearing on halacha. Vehem dvarim haneamarim levalbel hatzibor bishkarim. It's a fake, a fraud, a phony. It's a scam. It's a scam on the unlearned public. Of course they used it, but the question is, did they use it for blue? So how does that affect the halacha in any way? Sounds pretty reasonable that this is not halachic proof. You want to hear something that they invoke as irrefutable evidence that this is a Techeles? And this is coming from Talmid Chacham. Irrefutable evidence, because on the coins of Bar Kochva, there is an emblem of the Murex trunculus. So obviously, would they put a davar tameh on a coin of Bar Kochva? So it must be it was used for Techeles. And that is cited as irrefutable evidence. Because it's on a coin of Bar Kochva, you know, it appeared on coins before Bar Kochva. It appeared on coins after Bar Kochva. The Murex image was merely an emblem. It was like, you know, the alligator on the two-button shirt. It was just a name brand. Murex trunculus was the first name brand. It was the first name. It was like when you have on the back of your car, you know, the L. When anybody buy a Lexus, if they say you could drive it, you just can't have the emblem. Right? Shaita shabaylam. You're gonna drive a car without the emblem. If you're driving an expensive car, you better have that emblem. The Murex trunculus was an emblem, but to cite that as proof that this is the Techeles. You ever see one Rabbi Akiva Eger say any type of argument like this? You ever see any Paisek say an argument like that? I read to you what Rabbi Reisman writes. He says, in summation, there is no Gemara in Shas that indicates that this is the Techeles. Maybe you could stuff it in, but you don't create halachas from dichukim. I think it's very reasonable. There are major questions on this. Okay. And the summary of Mendele Singer, the PhD, he writes also. He says, look at number 20. The identity of the Chelazon was lost for many centuries. Without a tradition as the correct species and without a sample of ancient Techeles, it might not be possible to identify the Chelazon with certainty. However, there are minimum requirements that can be expected to be met in order to seriously entertain the possibility of a species being the Chelazon. Says Mendele Singer, next paragraph, Murex trunculus does not meet any of the primary criteria. Arguments brought in favor of it rely on new interpretations of the Gemara that contradict classical Mefarshim. Skip a paragraph. Murex trunculus meets few of the secondary criteria. In summary, the case for Murex trunculus as a Chilazon has little merit. Indeed, the evidence against Murex trunculus as a Chilazon is overwhelming. Now I want to tell you, when we're analyzing the sugya, we're not going to decide whether we're going to wear Techeles based on the article of this gentleman. Because again, this is also not the halachic process. The question is, does it fit into the Rishonim? Does it fit into the Paiskim? What do the Paiskim say, bottom line, about Techeles? Should you wear it? Should you not wear it? That's what we're here for tonight. So you'll say, what's the downside? What do I have to lose? If it's not Techeles, I lost $100. But if it's Techeles, I was kaina oilam haba mitzvah dairaisa. Is there any downside? Some suggest the following downside. The Gemara Masechta Bava Metzia says, God will punish those who instead of wearing real Techeles, wear kala ilan. Kala ilan was the fake Techeles, was the imposter Techeles. It was indigo. So the Ben Yehoyada, Ben Ishchai wants to know, why would the Gemara pick this example of a fraudulent item? Why not say, God will punish those who instead of putting in Parshas in their tefillin, they put in comic books. God will punish those instead of taking an esrog, take a lemon. Why dafka? God will punish those who instead of wearing Techeles will take kala ilan. You ready for this? This is frightening. Says the Ben Yehoyada, the color of Techeles is so holy, so much Kedusha, it can only be tolerated when the Beis HaMikdash is standing. Okay, that alone is not, we're not going to paskin halachas based on this Kabbalistic concept. He says, Techeles has so much Kedusha. What has more Tumah? A Rasha Gamor? Or a Tzaddik, or a Rasha who dresses up like a Tzaddik? The most Tumah in the world is when the Yetzer Hara puts on the garb of the Tzaddik. Techeles is so tahar v'kadosh. The most tumadika thing in the world is imposter Techeles. Any color that's not Techeles but looks like Techeles, you know what it has on it? The Malach HaMaves. Sitra Achra. In fact, why is it called Kala Ilan? Kala, what does Kala mean? Kala is numerical value 131. The same numerical value as Samach Mem, then Aleph Lamed. The angel of Esav, the angel of death. Says the Ben Yehoyada, someone who instead of wearing Techeles wears the imposter, you know who's hanging on to your garment? The Sitra Achra, the Samach Mem, the most fierce, strongest Kayach HaTumah imaginable. So if you want to know, is there a downside? Yeah, there's a downside. But you'll say, come on, this is a Kabbalistic reason. We don't paskin halachas based on Kabbalah. You're right. This is a Kabbalistic reason. Rav Shlomo Miller, who is a Paisik in Canada, now in Lakewood, he wrote a letter to one of the Talmidei Chachamim in the Institute of Techeles, and he writes there's a downside, because if this is not Techeles and it's Kala Ilan, you're dealing with the forces of Tumah. So they wrote back to him. This is in a letter over here, which was printed in the OU source book when they had a conference 7 years ago. I got my hands on it, Baruch Hashem. Rabbi Eliyahu Tavgar, who's one of the Talmidei Chacham behind the Techeles, he argues very strongly. He says, look, if people are wearing this because they're mesupik, maybe this is really Techeles, and it's Safek D'Oraisa, Chas v'shalom to say that, well, if they don't get it right, they're going to be carrying the Samach Mem around with them. No, we don't say such things. If people in earnest are trying to fulfill a mitzvah d'oraisa, then they have to do their best. Safek d'oraisa l'chumra. We don't get bogged down by these Kabbalistic concerns. And I think he's right. If there's really a possibility this is Techeles, we don't weigh into the equation, well, maybe it's Kala Ilan. That's not a halachic consideration. And maybe we could make the case because there's a well-known passage from Rav Shamshin Me'ash Japolia, one of the great Mekubalim, quoted by Rav Yitzchak Yosef in the Yalkut Yosef, that in the year that while the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, we will not have Techeles, but in the year 5600, the Techeles will be found. So wow, we have a great Mekubal who writes and predicts Techeles will be found in the year 5600. And in fact, the Radzina Rebbe found Techeles. Yeah, but we're not dealing with the Radzina Rebbe's Techeles. And the Radzina Rebbe's Techeles was shown by the Poskim not to be accurate. And this is the year 5774. We're not in the year 5600. So what did Rav Sham Shemash Apolya mean? I don't know. But again, we're not going to paskin halachos based on Kabbalistic predictions. So let's get bottom line. Bottom line is, when you don't know what to do, you have to ask the Poskim HaMeforsanim. You have to ask the Gedolei Hadar. What do they say about Techeles? Okay? Number one, let's look at Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef. We're going to deal with the Sfardim first. Sometimes we do the Ashkenazim first. Tonight, we're going to do with the Sfardim first. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, that in Hilchos Tzitzis or Chaim Simentes, that which people have today, Techeles, it is not clear definitively that this is Techeles. V'lachein lo ra'inu laharbe migdolei hadar shenagu zeh. You won't find many of the Gedolim wearing it. So what should we do? You should do what the Gedolei Hadar do. What do the Gedolei Hadar do? They don't wear Techeles. Do what your Rebbe does. So whoever your Rebbe is, follow his lead. Follow the Gedolei Hadar. That doesn't sound so antagonistic to the Techeles, because what if my Rebbe wears it? And who are the Gedolei Yisrael? So says Yitzchak Yosef, I'll tell you who the Gedolei Yisrael are. He says, by the Sfardim, we were Zoicha to see the last generation of Gedolim. You know who they were? Reb Ezra Atiyah, Reb Yaakov Adas, Reb Ovadia Hodaya. Guess what? They all had white tzitzis. And when they were presented with the possibility of Techeles, they said, no thank you. Umi Zakenem es Bainon. If you want to know what to do, look at the Gedolim. Says Rabbi Yitzchak, we don't find any of the great Sephardic Gedolim wearing Techeles. And go to Ir HaKodesh B'nai Brak. Chazon Ish wasn't interested. The Stipler did not wear it. And therefore says Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef, we contemplate what the Gedolim do. Umemela in lanu lechadesh minhagim shleinagu behem rabbeinu ugdolei hadoros achronim. Don't do it. That's the conclusion of Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef. Don't do it. Very interesting. What did Rabbi Ovadia Yosef hold? Well, it's assumed that everything in the Yalkut Yosef was reviewed by Rabbi Ovadia, and I think it's pretty safe to assume that. But beyond that, I found recently in a new published sefer called Mayan Omer, questions that they asked Rabbi Ovadia, and they asked Rabbi Ovadia, should we wear Techeles? He said it's not usher. So he says, so should we do it? He said no. Why? Because we have a Kabbalah from the Arizal that we won't have Techeles until Mashiach comes. And he said in a Shiur that we trust that which Rav Yeshua Melekutner wrote, that for 1,000 years the tradition in Klal Yisrael was that we will not have Techeles until Mashiach comes. So Rabbi Ovadia said, we don't do it. So that's for Sfardim. How about Ashkenazim? How about Ashkenazim? I believe that the most important tshuva written on this topic was the tshuva of Rabbi Yashiv. Again, Rabbi Yitzchak Yosef is commenting on what the earlier generations did not do. The Sefer Maya Noimer, Rabbi Ovadia didn't write it. They asked him and they recorded it. But here, Reb Elyashiv, who was a Paisek Achron, was a Paisek Hadar, was a Zaken Hadar, who was not writing tshuvas like other Paiskim write many tshuvas. He selected that which he wrote about. He wrote very briefly, and he shied away from any controversy. If he took the time to write about Techeles, I believe this is the most emphatic words we have, the strongest words we have about this subject. And Reb Elyashiv was not asked by a regular person. He was asked by a Gadol B'Yisrael in his own right, Rav Faivel Cohen, who authored the Badei HaShulchan, a very important work on Yeridea. So certainly Rav Faivel Cohen was capable of paskening on this issue, like he did on thousands of issues on Yeridea. And yet Rav Faivel Cohen felt that this was an issue that affects all of Klal Yisrael, and we need the opinion of the Paisek Hadar. So despite the fact that he's machriya in literally thousands of machlokes in Yeridea, this is something he had to bring to Rabbi Elyashiv. And he brings to Rabbi Elyashiv, he says, Rabbi Elyashiv, what do you say about the Techeles today, where many scientists say they are certain that this is the Techeles, and they say, what do we have to lose? Says Rabbi Elyashiv, 5 reasons, 5 arguments. Number 1, says Rabbi Elyashiv, this is not a new story. This is as old as the hills. The pursuit of Techeles is the oldest story in the book. And you see, by the way, the Tzidkus of Rabbi Elyashiv. He says one of the Gedolei Ha'admorim, 100 years ago, gathered Jews together and cried, Chai v'kayim, why doesn't anyone care about Techeles? And guess what? Says Rabbi Elyashiv, the Gedolim didn't agree with him. And very soon after him, he was proven wrong. Now look at the Tzidkus of Rabbi Elyashiv. He won't even say who's the name of this Admar. Maybe it would be a prisus in his kavod. He says one of the Gedolei Ha'admorim. We all know who it was. We spent a lot of time on it. Then after him, another Gadol B'Yisrael claimed he knew what Techeles was. We know who he was also. Rabbi Elyashiv doesn't write the name. And after him, they proved him wrong. And now scientists claim they got it right. Says Rabbi Elyashiv, V'anachnu lo neda im lo ka'avur shanim yavoyu acherim v'yivatlu divrayim. Who knows? Can we be certain that in a year, or in a month, or maybe in a week, new scientists will come and say they also got it wrong? That's argument number one. Rabbi Yoshev was a very astute student of history. You don't get caught up in a fad. You gotta be observant of what the historical trends are. This is a reoccurring trend. Number two, one of the reasons the Beis Halevi did not accept the Radzina Rebbe's Techeles is he said, we had the cuttlefish for centuries. We didn't use it. That means we have a Messiah that it's not the Chila zone. By the way, remember we had two versions of the story? Rabbi Yoshev is telling you what he believes the version of the story is. We have a Messiah that it's not it, says Rabbi Yoshev very honestly. I'm not sure. It could be that this same taina applies to this discovery. That this is a Murex trunculus we had for 2,000 years. They knew how to make the dye, and they weren't using it. So perhaps this question applies on the Murex trunculus as well. Third argument, says Rabbi Yoshev, the Gadol, the Yeshua's Malkoi writes, for 1,000 years the tradition in Klal Yisrael was that Techeles was lost. Argument number 4, it's a machlokes rishonim how to make the Techeles. Do you put in samimanim or do you not put in samimanim? The Rambam says you do. Rashi says you don't. Who's right? We're going to say in 2014, who's right between Rashi and the Rambam? We're not capable of doing that, says Rabbi Yoshev. And you want to know, what do you have to lose, says Rabbi Yoshev, you have a lot to lose. Because we paskin lechatchila, listen carefully, that the tzitzis need to be the color of the beged, unless it's real Techeles. If it's not real Techeles, and it's just a blue coloring, your strings are a different color than the beged, and lechatchila, your tzitzis are not kosher. Lechatchila. But the Eved, they're kosher. So here, this is the psak of the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Tes of Katan Hey. Yesh oimrim shetzarech lasos hatzitzis mitzeva hatalis v'hamedaktikim noigen came. So you say it's only a yesh oimrim. The Pri Megadim says we're noyeg this way. Says Rabbi Yoshev, if you got the Techeles right, good. But if you got it wrong, your tzitzis are not kosher l'chadchila. For these 5 reasons, says Rabbi Yoshev, we await the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. And then when Mashiach comes, we'll have the real Techeles. But until then, Paskins, the Poisek Hadar, we don't wear Techeles. As far as I'm concerned, case closed. Case closed. So I'll ask you a question on Rabbi Yoshev. Rabbi Yoshev used 5 arguments. Did he miss one argument? Why didn't Rabbi Yoshev say what we said from the second Shiur? That it's a 3-way machlokes, how many strings you need. Do you need, like the Rambam says, 1 of the 8? Do you need, like the Ravid says, 2 of the 8? Or do you need, like Rashi and says, 4 of the 8? Why did Rabbi Yoshev say, and we don't know how many strings you need? So I believe that Rabbi Yoshev purposely did not use that argument. Because in an article written by Rav Hershel Schachter, he points out very correctly that this is a matter that the Mishnah Berurah paskined on. In fact, if you look carefully in 2 places, number 30 and number 31, the Mishnah Berurah Siman Tes Sivkat on Zayin, and the Mishnah Berurah Sivkat on Yudaled writes from the Atzos HaChaim from the Malbim that we paskin like Rabbeinu Tam 4 out of 8. The Mishnah Berurah says. So why didn't Rabbi Yoshev say, and we don't know how to paskin 1 out of 8, 2 out of 8, 4 out of 8? Rav Hershel Schachter is right. Because the Mishnah Berurah paskins, we do know. But Rabbi Yoshev very correctly writes, Mishnah Berurah doesn't paskin, do you put in samim on him, or do you not put in samim on him? You see how carefully Rabbi Yoshev wrote? Others use that argument, we don't know how many strings. Rabbi Yoshev was careful. He knew the Mishnah Berurah. And therefore, I believe, in my humble opinion, you have the Paisik Achroin, Rabbi Yoshev. What if Klal Yisrael doesn't know what to do? He's a Kainam as Bainam. Rabbi Yoshev said, don't do it. How about Reb Chaim Kanievsky? What does he have to say? Now, would Rebbe Yashiv say you're not allowed to? No, Rebbe Yashiv never said you're not allowed to. He never said there's an Isser. He just said if it's not Techeles, your tzitzis are not kosher lechatchila. He said it might be a negative Messiah, and he said that we have a tradition that Techeles won't be found, and we don't know about the Samimanim, and lechatchila the tzitzis have to be. And Rabbi Yashiv also said probably scientists will come and prove this wrong. Reb Chaim Kanievsky is not so kind. In a new sefer, Das Noite, Reb Chaim Kanievsky was asked, look at number 33. Hayim yesh makom lahachmir, is there any reason to be machmir to wear Techeles? Because even if they're wrong, you don't have anything to lose. Says Reb Chaim Kanievsky, ein b'divreihem mamish. There is no substance to what they're saying. Why not? Chazal said Techeles was hidden. Hidden means we won't have it till Mashiach comes. Says Reb Chaim, you can't create halachas based on mere speculation, based on mere scientific speculation. The questioner wasn't satisfied. They said, Reb Chaim, but we know from the Maharil and the Malbim and the Smag that they write there are certain halachos that apply today, namely that we don't put wool string, we don't put linen strings on a linen garment, because maybe Techeles will come back. So we see maybe Techeles could come back, Reb Chaim. So how could you say Chazal say it was Nignas? We see from Poskim maybe it will come back. Says Reb Chaim, when Mashiach comes, we'll have Techeles. The questioner wasn't satisfied. He said, I don't understand. Just because Chazal say it was hidden, but maybe it will come back. Says Reb Chaim, you have to know how to read Chazal. You know what the word nignaz means? It means what it means everywhere in Chazal, like in Avos Reb Nasan. Look in note 336. Reb Chaim says there's a Mishnah in Pirkei in Avos Reb Nasan. The Oyel Moyed, the Mishkan was nignaz. Did it come back? No. The Aron was nignaz. Did it come back? No. The Luchais were nignaz. Did it come back? No. The mun, you ever hear anyone? The institute that found the mun? Or the mate of Aaron? Or the shemen hamishcha? Or the makel hashaked of Aaron? Or the big day kahuna? Imagine someone walking in the street, he found the big day kahuna. Says Rav Chaim, just like we don't have the ketores, we don't have Techeles. If you're mamin b'divrei chazal, you don't have Techeles. What if you only have one pair of tzitzis and it has Techeles on it? Are you allowed to wear it? No. You're not allowed to wear it, says Reb Chaim. Can't wear it. Says they asked him, Mi sheyesh lo talis imsil Techeles, ho'em muter lo lelavshay, ayadif de lo lelavshay. Are you allowed to wear it or better not to? Says Reb Chaim, you can't wear it. You're not allowed to fool people that this is Techeles. But what about the shittas that hold it is Techeles? Are you worried about Baal Tosef? Reb Chaim says no. That you're not over Baal Tosef, but you still shouldn't wear it. But you don't have to worry you're being over an Isser Dairaisa. You just shouldn't wear it. You should not, if that's your only pair. What if I'm on a desert island? That's my only pair. Don't wear it. Nobody will see me. Marasayin. You never know. People are looking. In fact, the Reb Chaim Kanievsky has in his notes that they asked the Chazon Ish, but it doesn't hurt. Chazon Ish says it also doesn't hurt to wear glasses with no lenses in them. That also doesn't hurt, right? To wear glasses with no lenses also doesn't hurt, the Chazon Ish said. And one time the Chazon Ish said, these are not my words, he said, you want to take a cow and dye your tzitzis with a cow, Chazon Ish said. That's how certain Chazon Ish was that way. Again, these are not my words. These are words of Gedolei Yisrael. So Rabbi Yosef just says, don't do it. He doesn't say it's usher. Reb Chaim says, don't do it. Are you over a lav of lois sky to do if you wear Techeles? Reb Chaim said, it's not usher, but it's not roy to wear it because of lois sky to do. Should you rebuke someone, they asked Reb Chaim, who wears Techeles? He says, if you want to. If you want to. Yasek Kishazan.
Why would so many nice from Jews even attempt this? It's the end result is this.
That's why we had 5 shiurim on it.
100%
That's why we had 5 shiurim on it. Now again, there are big Talmid Chacham that are for it, but for us, when we want to know what to do, you have to look to the Gdolei Hadar. If you're a Talmud of a certain Talmid Chacham who are great people and they do it, so you have a right to follow them. But otherwise, you follow the Poskim HaMefarsalim, the Gdolei Hadar. That is my humble viewpoint. This week, they came out with a tshuva from Rav Moshe Sternbuch, who Reb Chaim Kanievsky said, if it's your only pair, you shouldn't wear it, but he's not willing to say you're over an Isser D'Oraisa. Rav Moshe Sternbuch is willing to say that you might be over an Isser D'Oraisa by wearing the Techeles of Baal Tosef. Why? He said, why can't you just make a Tanai? And if it's not Techeles, I don't want to be Mekayim the Mitzvah, like people wear Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin. They make a Tanai that if it's not Tefillin, he says that a Tanai doesn't help if it's so far-fetched that it's almost impossible that it's Techeles. That's what he writes. Now I'm going to share with you something very personal. Something I'm thinking about, and I wasn't sure what the answer is, and I'm still not 100% sure. What if somebody does put on Techeles, and it turns out in heaven it is Techeles, let's say? Do they get schar? You say, of course. Yeah, but Rabbi Yasher Paskin, it's not Techeles. Down here in this world, the Bezdin Shalmata, Rabbi Yasher, Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky. And by the way, I want to share something with you that I don't think has ever been said publicly. I wanted to know what Rav Moshe held. What did Rav Moshe Feinstein? He's the Mard Asra of the Artsois Habris. He's the Rav of the United States of America. What did Rav Moshe say? So I spoke to Rabbi Baruch Moskowitz, who learns every day with Rab David Feinstein. He's the author of Shalos Utshuvas V'Dibar Tabam. And I asked him, what did Rav Moshe hold? What did Rab David hold? So I said, I'm not asking political reasons. I want to know for myself, what's the correct halach? He said, Rab David went to the institution in Eretz Yisrael. They presented him all the information. Rab David did not accept it. Rab David had questions on it. What did Rav Moshe hold? Rav Moshe did not accept it. I said, do you have this in writing? He said, yes. I said, can I see it? I had to come back the next day. I said, can I please see it? So he gave me a copy of his notes, and probably one day it will be in the edition. And he writes, and he paskins. Rav Moshe didn't accept it. Rav David Feinstein doesn't accept it. The Gedolei Yisrael don't accept it. And Klal Yisrael does not accept it. Roiv of Klal Yisrael does not accept it. So, if you have Rav Moshe, and you have Rav Yashiv, and you have Rav Chaim Kanievsky, and you have Rav Avadia Yosef, so, if you don't know what to do, Mizakenim es bainan. You look to the Gedolei Yisrael. But I wanted to know, but what if it is Techeles and you wear it, you get schar? And I'm thinking to myself, maybe you don't get schar. Because if the Gedolei Yisrael paskin it's not Techeles, then in this world the reality is not Techeles. But that's a big chiddush to say you don't get schar. And Baruch Hashem, Rav Sternbuch writes these words. I read to you his words at the end of his tshuva. Hamachmir l'loiv shoy, someone is machmir to wear it. Doime lema sha'amru de hamachmir k'bei shamai lo yasa klum. Let's say somebody today is machmir on Chanukah. He lights 2 menorahs. One moisif v'hoilech, and one he goes down. Do you get schar to going like Beishamai? Of course not. Says Rav Sternbuch, v'lo yikabel schar al kach. You won't even get schar. You know what you'll get schar for? For not wearing it. Because if you don't wear it, you're following the Gedolei Yisrael. Something that said, why would the Rebbe Shalom present us with the Murex Trunculus? What does he want? The answer is the Rebbe Shalom in his infinite chesed is giving us the opportunity to be Mekayim a mitzvah. You know what the mitzvah is? To follow the Gedolei Yisrael and not wear the Techeles. It's a great mitzvah the Rebbe Shalom is giving us. You wear tzitzis for protection. Is there any greater protection than to say that I wear my tzitzis in accordance with the great protection of the Gedolei Yisrael. But now, Rav Chaim, they asked Rav Chaim, should you be moicha against somebody? He said, if you want to. I'm not suggesting that. Rabbi Yoshev never said that. Rav Moshe never said that. The Rabbi Avadia said, I'm not suggesting that. But there's a very interesting, humorous story that in the times of the Radzina Rebbe, one of the people who did not believe in the Techeles got so angry that someone was wearing Techeles that he ripped the garment off of his friend and he burned it in the fire. And he came to the Gadol Rav Shmuel Salant and he said, Rav Shmuel, no, did I do right? He said, you're like Pinchas. You're mamish mekane kinnas Hashem. But you owe him $100 for his beged. Okay. So as says Rav Sternbach, so what should a person do if he really wants to be mekayim the mitzvah of Techeles? He says, you know what you should do? Exactly what we've been doing for the last 5 weeks. You should learn the sugya in depth. And just like we say, if you learn about the Karban Chatas, it's as if you are mekayim the Karban Chatas. And if you learn about the Karban Oila, it's as if you brought the Karban Oila. If you learn the sugya of Techeles, Hashem should consider it ki'ilu ki'amtanu mitzvah tzitzis b'chol pratea v'diktukea v'chavanasea. Let's add one idea. Says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, how unfortunate, how tragic it is that we barely have any mitzvahs today. No karbanos, no mitzvahs tluyos b'beis hamikdash. Even tzitzis we don't have b'shleimus. Says Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz. Look at number 37. Anachnu b'goyla on the third line. Rubei mitzvahs ein lanu l'kayim. Ba'afilu mitzvahs tzitzis ein b'yadeinu. Ki ein lanu Techeles. So what's our consolation? What's our nechama? Avozois nechamaseinu. Ki ho'el ve'ein sipek b'yadeinu l'kayim ha-mitzvahs. Yesh lanu schar ka'oisa mitzvah. You could get reward as if you did the mitzvah. How? A few lines down. Chayva al kol ish. It's an obligation on every person. Besumay tzitzis bevigdai. When you put on your tzitzis in the morning, when you put on your talis in the morning, lizkar b'mitzvah Techeles. Remember the mitzvah of Techeles. Ulehisaneach b'shivrein masnayim. You should moan and groan and krecht. Oy gewalt, I can't be mekayim the mitzvah of Techeles. I wish I could be mekayim Techeles, says Rabbi Yonasan. If you really feel sad that you can't be mekayim Techeles, the same way Esther wished she could have been mekayim kibbut avayim, and Hashem considers it as if she did in the perfect way, and the same way Rabbi Chanina ben Doisa wished he could have been mekayim tzedakah, and Hashem considers it as if he did. Any Jew that wishes he can be mekayim Techeles, Hashem considers it as if you're mekayim Techeles b'chol pratea v'diktukea v'chavanasea. So chas v'shalom loy basi lekanter. We didn't come to challenge anybody who follows their respective rabbanim, but nevertheless, I think it's clear that the Gedolei Yisrael say do not recommend it, and therefore Roiv of Klal Yisrael that continues to wear levanim. Yesh lahem al misha yismaichu, and even more than that, is it correct to wear Techeles? What we're saying is, it is more correct not to wear the Techeles, and Hashem should consider it as if we're mekayim the mitzvah of tzitzis, b'chol pratea, v'diktukea, v'chavanaseh. We should be zoicha to be haskayel tzedek, and the real Techeles meher v'yameinu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.